I've got to admit that I may be flying under somewhat of false colors here today. When Rob Dewey called me and said, look, we want you to come to Mill City, I just presumed that meant military city, and I showed up. I can see by the lack of uniforms here, I may have miscalculated a little bit on that. However, I'm told that General Mills is a huge name here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and I must have served with him at some point over my career. So we'll continue. I'm fascinated with this concept of insights to generate innovation and change. Because I think I've been involved both in the military and in motion pictures in that very sort of thing. So I'm going to share some thoughts on two basic areas with you here today. But I'm going to warn you that these thoughts come from a unique perspective. You're hearing from a guy who put his first military uniform on when he was 10 years old and never looked back or got out of that box for the next 30 years. So is that perspective unique? Well, we'll see. Talk about exploring concepts. I want to talk about two things here, and one is media saturation in our society and how that affects communication, whether it's communication with the public or it's communication in-house within our own organization. That's topic one. Topic two, I want to talk about something that's going to sound to you a little bit like psychobabble. Fear not. It's a concept called cognitive dissonance. And those two marry up to create change. Now, like many events in my weird and distraught life, the marriage of those concepts started or took place in the movies. I'd always been a film buff. I'd seen every military movie there was. Naturally, all the war movies, that's what I was involved in, that was my life, that's what I wanted to see. The common denominator was they upset me. I couldn't suspend my disbelief. I couldn't go with the flow of the story. I was taken out of the narrative. Virtually every film I saw about the military, and I wondered why that was. Why was that? And I began to reflect on my own career. I spent a lot of time in uniform raising other people's children, probably some of yours. And I recalled that it was always very difficult to take these young 18, 19, and 20-year-olds who had been brought up in the relative comfort of American society, the relative ease with which they passed their time and lived their lives. And then I had to take them, and I had to convince them that digging a hole in the ground until your hands are blistered, and then sleeping in that hole and living in that hole, and getting rained on and freezing at night and boiling during the day, and carrying 50 or 60-pound packs, and climbing up steep hills while somebody is shooting at you, I had to convince them that that was cool. That was something you want to do, that this is something to be pursued and enjoyed. It was always a tough sell, and the reason it was a tough sell is because of cognitive dissonance. Here's what that means. Think of it this way. You have an 18, 19, or 20-year-old youngster, human being, hopefully, by that point, and you have told them for their entire life that white is white. And then somewhere along in that 17, 18, 19, 20th year, you say, no, white is black. What happens is that's a hard sell. That doesn't relate. That causes a disconnect. That causes them to say, well, wait a minute. I'll do what you're asking me to do. I'll take myself out of the comfort zone, but cool, happy, something I really want to do, disconnect. That's cognitive disconnect. And I began to reflect on that, and I said, well, it certainly makes sense to me, because what I was seeing on the screen in military movies wasn't what I had experienced in real life, what I had experienced firsthand. So I was disconnecting. I was being taken out of the communication, out of the story. And I said, there's a thought. Is it only me? Or are other people finding a similar dissonance? And so I began to do some research. I began to look into mass communication. And I discovered in mass communication and mass media some very interesting things. One of which, and this was in a mass media study done at Northwestern University, by the way, tells us that the average television or radio is on in the average American home from 6 to 10 hours a day. Whether you're watching it or not, it is part and parcel of your existence. You are being consistently and constantly bombarded with images. Even if you don't care or think you don't, you are being influenced by those images. Add to that the internet, the World Wide Web, what's the other cliche? The information superhighway. And what you've got, according to the sociologists, you've got a media-saturated society. So I began to try to marry these concepts, and I said, maybe it is that we've got a problem in motion pictures because we are not reflecting the perceptions that audiences get from this constant bombardment of imagery. We are not reflecting what they know and what they may have seen live from some battlefield around the world at the 6:30 news, and then we want them to pay us $12 or $20 to come in and see something that doesn't look at all like what they have just seen on the History Channel. Disconnect. So I took that to Hollywood. I said, I have a great idea. Now, if you can create change in Hollywood, which is probably the most closed loop, arrogant, nepotistic society that I can describe to you, if you can make a change out there, you can make a change anywhere. And so I began to try to convince people that we need to get out of our own perspective, our own point of view, and we need to think about the point of view of the audience. Stop making pictures because it pleases you, the artiste, the thespian. Pee on you. You want the money from the folks who are in those theater seats. So how do we marry this up? How do we make it happen? Well, I believed, and still believe, that it takes a full immersion. Look, I grabbed actors who are probably the most pampered, spoon-fed individuals in the world. Believe me when I tell you, let me assure you, that the average Hollywood actor does not have your perspective on things. He or she sees life a little differently than you do. Hence, shallow performances. Hence, performances which do not reflect your context, your experience. What happens is disconnect. Disconnect on the part of the audience. So what do? Well, I take those actors and I give them a little bit of your perspective. I make them dig that hole. I make them live in that hole. I make them experience an element of life which says it's not about you. There is something bigger and better out there. Now, they experience immediate cognitive dissonance, but they can't escape because I have them, I own them. and I force them to experience what you experience every day. And it's a great culture shock to them many times. Huge culture shock. I gotta do what? Wait a minute, where's my trailer and how's my hair look? I don't care. You're going to live life as a real individual. You're going to relate to another individual with something about, does he have more lines in this scene than I do? I'm going to teach you how to reflect real characters on the screen. And when I do that, your performance will reflect the context of the audience. It will mirror or resemble what they know and what they have seen. That's not an easy task. I do it, quite frankly, in a very physical fashion. Actors, in many cases, are like dry sponges. But you got to get at the sponge, you see. And so what I do is physically wear them out. I hurt them. And I don't mind admitting I get some sort of sadistic pleasure in that. I hurt them. I take them places they have never been before in their life, and it changes their life. They begin to understand that perhaps there is something out there that is larger than myself. Perhaps there is something out there that merits service and sacrifice, and it's not about me. When you can get to that point, you've got it made. Their lives will change. Now, why immersion? Can't I just stand up and do death by PowerPoint? Can I just, and believe me, I saw the grimaces, I know. You're not going to get death by PowerPoint out of me. I'm not Wharton School of Business. I don't even know what that means or how to spell it. You cannot do that. It takes full immersion. The key here, and what I want you to take away, is simply this. It is very difficult to teach these days in a media-saturated society. Because of that saturation, audiences bring with them a certain skepticism, a certain cynicism. You're wrong before you open your mouth. You're trying to cheat me before you try to tell me what you're selling me. And that's an attitudinal thing. Who's to blame? Well, we are. Anybody here involved in marketing? A lot of you are, I think, aren't you? Yeah, okay. Pay attention. That cynicism is something that you have to get over, and you will not get over it by pretty words and pictures anymore. Won't work. You've got to search for methods of communication that involve all of the senses. That's what I do when I'm training actors. I can talk to them all day long. I can lecture to them all day long. Not going to help. I have to immerse them in it. They have to experience it. All of the senses have to be involved. And when you're creating messages, you need to be sure that you are involving all of those senses. Don't ignore them. Don't think that words and music are sufficient. They are not, I rush to assure you. Now, one other thing that I want you to remember. We talked about cognitive dissonance. We have a tendency, those of us who are up on the idea, the conceptual level, we have a tendency to bring our own perspective to our message. We have a tendency to think, whatever I think here at my level must be what the great unwashed think. Wrong. And the worst mistake you can make is bringing your own perspective to the message. Nobody cares about your perspective. It's the audience's perspective. It's what they conceive, what their preconceptions are, what their experiences are that must be included in your message. All right, one final thing. How many of you are involved in management? How many of you are managers? Show of hands. Lots of folks out there, managers, management. Here's my tip about management. Stop doing it. Cease and desist. Look, folks, remember I told you I'm going to bring a military perspective to this, and here's one thing I learned in all of that time, and it's important to you. Things, budgets, systems can be managed. People cannot. People must be led. And you've got to lead them from the front. You can't push a rope. You got to pull it. That means stop thinking of yourself as managers. Take all the Wharton School of business models, write them down, piece of paper, use them for toilet paper. Start leading. That's where innovation and creativity comes from. If you're crunching numbers, if you're managing, you're wrapped around your own axle. Open your mind, get out there and lead. Think of yourself as a leader. That's one of the reasons I'm so delighted to be with you here today, because I think we've got a bunch of potential leaders out there. Many of you should be in uniform. I have no idea why you're not. You've been a delightful audience. Thank you so much for giving me this time to share some thoughts and hopefully some insights with you. If they lead to innovation, they will lead to change. Thank you very much.